All right, we are looking at Chapter 3 of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's actually super short, probably the shortest one, so we might read the whole thing and kind of recap where we are. So Chapter 1, we talked about this story. Mr. Utterson and his friend were walking down the street, and they pointed out this weird, sort of haunted house-looking place with a strange gate that gets homeless people sitting on it and boys carving graffiti on it, and nobody seems to repair the thing. Mr. Utterson's friend said that we had a strange incident there where a man sort of turned the corner, ran into a kid and trampled over the kid, got grabbed by the citizens, and they really just hated him. Something about this guy, besides his actions, something about his face just made everyone want to beat him up or kill him even. But they decided to extort this guy and get some money out of him in order to give to the child's family and hopefully make things even. And the funny thing was that guy went into this strange gate, this abandoned haunted house looking place, and came out with some money and came out with a check. Everyone thought, oh, it must be fake, but it turned out to be real, and the mystery begins there. The next chapter, Mr. Utterson, our main guy, looks into this, and he's thinking about Mr. Hyde, this strange man who looks kind of normal. You can't tell exactly what's going on, but everybody who encounters him just thinks he must be some kind of monster. There's no obvious deformity, but everyone thinks, well, there must be. Is he even human? Is he some kind of goblin or something? And at the end of Chapter 2, which I didn't read aloud because I stopped that video before it became too long, but at the end of Chapter 2, Mr. Utterson goes to that house, which is owned by Dr. Jekyll, and asks some of the servants, who all tell him, like, oh yeah, Hyde comes in and out and we're supposed to do what he says. That makes Mr. Utterson even more suspicious. He's mentioned a few times that maybe it's some kind of blackmail, like maybe Hyde has some kind of threat against Jekyll that makes Jekyll go along with him, let him come into the house, let him take money, and so on. Obviously, we know something else because this is a famous story, and we know a little more than the character does, but in some ways it can throw us off. I mentioned last time that in some of the modern retellings, if you look at League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, I think, or the recent Mummy from 2017 with Tom Cruise, in those versions, Dr. Jekyll is basically like the Hulk. When he turns into Mr. Hyde, he gets big and he's like this rampaging werewolf type thing. And obviously that's not how it is in the original. We can see that Hyde is just a guy who can walk and talk and wear normal clothes, and everybody knows there's something going on with him, and they immediately all just hate him. But they don't get thrown across the city, and he doesn't like tear down buildings or something. So that's one thing I'm going to keep in mind today, is that we're trying to see what's really there and not just what's in our prejudice of what we assume we know about the story. So as you can see, the audio version, if you click play on this page for the chapter, is only 5 minutes. So it's pretty quick. Let's see if we can read some or all of it. A fortnight later, and by the way, fortnight means 2 weeks. By excellent good fortune, the doctor gave one of his pleasant dinners to some 5 or 6 old cronies, all intelligent, reputable men, and all judges of good wine. And Mr. Utterson so contrived that he remained behind after all others had departed. This was no new arrangement, but a thing that had befallen many scores of times. Where Utterson was liked, he was liked well. Hosts loved to detain the dry lawyer when the light-hearted man and the loose-tongued had already their foot on the threshold. They liked to sit a while in his unobtrusive company, practicing for solitude, sobering their minds in the man's rich silence after the expense and strain of gaiety. To this rule, Dr. Jekyll was no exception, and as he now sat on the opposite side of the fire, a large, well-made, smooth-faced man of 50, with something of a slyish cast, perhaps, but every mark of capacity and kindness, you could see by his looks that he cherished for Mr. Utterson a sincere and warm affection. This is, like I said in Chapter 1, really reminds me of The Great Gatsby, how the main character in Gatsby, Nick, is just kind of a bland guy that people share their life with. And we know Gatsby's story because he's fine with having Nick there, even when he's talking about, crime and fraud and other things. And so Jekyll is fine with having Utterson there, even if he's going to, confess some things that he wouldn't confess to others. Something about, this type of person just invites confidential info. "I've been wanting to speak to you, Jekyll," he began the latter. "You know that will of yours?" A close observer might have gathered that the topic was distasteful, but the doctor carried it off gaily. "My poor Utterson," said he, "you are unfortunate in such a client. I never saw a man so distressed as you were by my will, unless it were that hidebound pedant, Lanyon, at what he called my scientific heresies. Oh, I know he's a good fellow, you needn't frown, an excellent fellow, and I always mean to see more of him. But a hidebound pedant for all that, an ignorant, blatant pedant. I was never more disappointed in any man than Lanyon." "You know I never approved of it," pursued Utterson, ruthlessly disregarding the fresh topic. "My will? Yes, certainly I know that," said the doctor, a trifle sharply. "You have told me so." "Well, I tell you so again," continued the lawyer. "I've been learning something of young Hyde." The large, handsome face of Dr. Jekyll grew pale to the very lips, and there came a blackness about his eyes. "I do not care to hear more," said he. "This is a matter I thought we had agreed to drop." "What I heard was abominable," said Utterson. "It can make no change. You do not understand my position," returned the doctor with a certain incoherency of manner. "I am painfully situated, Utterson. My position is a very strange one. It is one of those affairs that cannot be mended by talking." "Jekyll," said Mr. Utterson, "you know me. I am a man to be trusted. Make a clean breast of this in confidence, and I make no doubt I can get you out of it." So this is Utterson pushing it more than anybody else could. If somebody else was talking to Jekyll and said, "Hey, you gotta tell me about this Hyde guy. What's the deal?" Jekyll would probably be a lot more mean in response, but Utterson is known for being non-judgmental. So even if he's asking, there's this idea that maybe you could tell him and he wouldn't immediately gasp and run to the cops or something. "My good Utterson," said the doctor, "this is very good of you. It is downright good of you, and I cannot find words to thank you, and I believe you fully. I would trust you before any man alive, I before myself, if I could make the choice. But indeed it isn't what you fancy. It's not so bad as that. Just to put your good heart at rest, I will tell you one thing. The moment I choose, I can be rid of Mr. Hyde. I'll give you my hand upon that, and I thank you again and again. And I will add just one little word, Utterson, that I'm sure you'll take in good part. This is a private matter, and I beg of you to let it sleep." We saw a nice I in there, that AY, because the author, Robert Louis Stevenson, is Scottish, and I don't remember if he said Jekyll is Scottish too, but they live in London at this point. So he says, "Hey, anytime I want, I can get rid of Hyde." It almost sounds like, and of course this is going to be something that pops up throughout the story, it almost sounds like an addiction, like, oh, I can quit anytime I want, get off my back. And that's one way that some people look at this story. Utterson reflected a little, looking in the fire. "I have no doubt you are perfectly right," he said at last, getting to his feet. "Well, but since we have touched upon the business, and for the last time, I hope," continued the doctor, "there's one point I should like you to understand. I have really a very great interest in poor Hyde. I know you've seen him. He told me so, and I fear he was rude. But I do sincerely take a very great interest in that young man. And if I am taken away, Utterson, I wish you to promise me that you'll bear with him and get his rights for him. I think you would if you knew all, and it would be a weight off my mind if you would promise." "I can't pretend that I shall ever like him," said the lawyer. "I don't ask that," pleaded Jekyll, laying his hand upon the other's arm. I only ask for justice. I only ask you to help him for my sake when I am no longer here. Utterson heaved an irrepressible sigh. Well, said he, I promise. So Utterson knows that Jekyll's fine. He's alive. He hasn't disappeared like we may have seen, uh, you know, hypothesized in earlier chapters. But Jekyll won't tell us what's up. He's saying, all right, there's this Hyde guy, and I know he's bad. I know you think he's a monster, but I have some connection with him, and I'm not going to tell you, but it's not as bad as you might think. You could almost think of it as like a really bad child, you know, like if Hyde was the troublesome son and Jekyll was trying to protect him or something like that. And we don't really know what the deal is. You know, he's having some excuse, some reason to protect Hyde, and Utterson is curious. It's almost like the weirder it gets, the more he wants to know, because it's just interesting. And of course, it's the same for the reader. So that's that for that chapter. It was very short. And then the next one, it's got murder in the title, so we know it's going to be good. There are a lot of stories from this time, although this isn't one of them. There are a lot of stories from this time that were published serially, meaning like in the newspaper, you'd get a new episode, you know, every week or every few days. And this almost feels like that, even though, as far as I know, it was published just once in a single volume. It's almost like each chapter is a quick episode where they introduce a new thing and sometimes have a little twist 3/4 of the way through. And by the end, we know one little bit more. And by the end of the whole thing, it's kind of like a season or a mini series where we've gone through all these little mini stories, and it comes out to be a big one. So this chapter is longer. It's more in the normal range, still not nearly as long as the ones in Shadow over Innsmouth. And my assignment is to read that chapter. I'm going to give you guys another little post with some questions. And this time, it's going to be all about what I mentioned at the beginning of this video, all about this idea of preconceptions, how we've heard of Jekyll and Hyde. We may have seen them in movies or comic books or whatever. And yet, when you read it, it's almost worse that you know. Like, if we were approaching this from scratch with no knowledge, it would be simple. And we would learn each little step one at a time. But now that we're reading it with our preconceptions, we think, wait, that's not what I thought. Wait, what's going on? And so it makes it more complicated in some ways. That is just what happens when you read a classic story. I had a class do the Iliad about the Trojan War, and they were all waiting for the moment when Achilles got shot in his heel. And that didn't happen because it doesn't happen in that book. And they were kind of thrown off by that because it was added later by other authors. So sometimes it's important to know what we know and to keep in mind what the audience at the time knew. Thanks.